The day my car broke down was the day my marriage began to fall apart. Though back then I thought it was just an engine problem. The smell of burning oil still clings to that memory, like the scent of something that once worked, now ruined by neglect. I remember standing on the side of the road, staring at smoke curling from the hood, completely unaware that the man who stopped to help me would soon become the fire that consumed everything I thought I knew about love. Loyalty and forgiveness. Before we move on, I need to be honest with you. My heart sank when I saw that 99% of you watch my videos but don't subscribe. It truly means the world when you do. It helps stories like this find the people who need them. So please, take a second to subscribe. And don't forget to tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing your locations. It reminds me that stories really do connect us, no matter where we are. If stories like this remind you how fragile love and trust can be, subscribe, because every untold truth deserves to be heard. The day I met him, the air was heavy with that strange kind of summer heat that makes everything feel slower, softer, almost suspended in time. My car had stalled at the edge of town, halfway between home and nowhere, and as I sat there listening to the tick of the cooling engine, I remember thinking how much that sound felt like my marriage. Something once vibrant, now winding down in tired little clicks. He appeared out of the shimmer of sunlight like a figure you'd see in an old photograph. A man in a grease-stained shirt, hands marked by work, eyes too calm for the chaos around him. "Need a hand?" he asked, and his voice carried this quiet assurance, like he'd seen 1,000 engines die before and always managed to bring them back to life. I should have said no. I should have called a tow truck like any sensible woman. But something in his tone made it feel less like an offer and more like rescue. So I nodded, stepped aside, and watched him lean beneath the hood, his movements sure and deliberate. The smell of motor oil and burnt metal filled the air. He cursed softly under his breath, not out of frustration, but habit. And I found myself smiling without meaning to. When he glanced up, there was a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "You take care of this thing?" he asked, half teasing. "I try," I said, pretending not to feel embarrassed. "She's just old." "Old ain't the problem," he said, tightening a bolt. "Neglect is." That word hit deeper than it should have. Neglect. It lingered, echoing somewhere private inside me. Because that was exactly what I'd been feeling. Not unloved, not abandoned, but neglected. My husband, Ryan, had been distant for months, lost in his own work and worries, barely noticing when I drifted through the house like a ghost. We hadn't touched in weeks. We barely spoke about anything that wasn't practical: bills, groceries, schedules. And yet, there I was, standing next to a stranger who noticed the smallest things. He told me his name was Elijah. Everyone in town called him Eli. He owned a small auto shop tucked behind a gas station, the kind of place most people passed without ever looking twice. But that afternoon it felt like a world of its own. The clang of tools, the scent of rubber and oil, the low hum of a fan cutting through the heat. When he asked me to follow him back to the shop so he could give the engine a proper look, I didn't hesitate. Maybe I should have, but I didn't. The moment I stepped inside, the noise of my life faded behind me. Everything in that space was worn but cared for, the kind of chaos that has purpose. He moved through it easily, like every bolt and wire was part of some language he'd spent his life learning. We talked while he worked, about nothing at first, the weather, how unreliable old cars can be, but soon it turned into something more personal. He told me he grew up fixing engines with his father, that he liked machines because they were honest. "They don't lie to you," he said. "If something's wrong, you can hear it. You can feel it?" I laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Must be nice," I said quietly, "to always know what's broken." He looked at me then. Really looked. His hands stilled on the wrench, and for a second I felt completely exposed, like he could see every crack I'd been hiding. But he didn't say anything. He just nodded once and went back to work. That silence felt safer than words. By the time he finished, the sun was dipping low, bleeding orange light through the open door of the shop. The car came back to life with a roar, and I remember the pride in his face when he heard it. "Told you she'd run again," he said. "She just needed someone to care enough to listen. I should have driven away." I even reached for the door handle, but then he wiped his hands on a rag and asked, almost casually, "You ever come by this way again? Stop in. I'll check the oil for free." I don't know why, but that offer stayed with me. It wasn't about the oil, and we both knew it. It was about being seen, about someone noticing that something inside me had stopped running right. That night, when I got home, Ryan was on the couch with his laptop, eyes glued to numbers that meant more to him than I did. He asked if the car was fixed without looking up. I told him yes. He nodded. That was it. No "glad you're okay." No "what happened?" Just silence, familiar and sharp. Lying in bed later, I replayed Elijah's voice in my head. The steadiness of it. The warmth. The way he'd said, "Neglect is the problem," like it was a truth meant for more than engines, and that's when it began. Not the affair, not the lies, just the thought of him. The simple, quiet memory of a man who fixed things with his hands and looked at me like I was something that still could be repaired. I didn't know it then, but that single thought was the first crack in everything that came after. The next time my car broke down, I didn't even bother pretending it was an accident. It was raining that morning, the kind of cold, relentless drizzle that turns everything gray, and I could have called any other mechanic. I told myself it was convenience, habit, anything but what it really was. An excuse. A quiet, desperate excuse to see him again. When I pulled into Elijah's shop, he looked up from under the hood of another car, that same half-smile tugging at his mouth. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon," he said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Guess she missed me." "Guess so," I replied, though I wasn't sure if I was talking about the car or myself. Inside, the place smelled of steel and rain. The radio hummed softly in the background, some old blues song that sounded like heartbreak set to rhythm. He poured me coffee, the kind that's always a little too bitter, and we stood there in the dim light, two people pretending to talk about spark plugs when the air between us was already burning. He told me about his life in pieces, a failed engagement, a mother who'd passed too early, a dream he once had of opening a bigger shop but never got around to. "Life's like that," he said, staring out the rain-streaked window. "You blink and it's gone a different way than you thought it would." "Yeah," I said softly. I know the feeling. Somewhere between laughter and silence, our walls began to lower. I told him how Ryan had changed, how our home had turned into a place filled with polite conversations and empty spaces. He didn't interrupt, didn't pity me, just listened. That kind of listening, the real kind, is dangerous. It makes you feel understood. And once you've felt that, it's hard to go back to being invisible. He offered to give me a ride home when the rain turned into a downpour. I said yes. We sat in his truck, the windshield wipers moving in slow, rhythmic arcs. The world outside blurred into streaks of light and water. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Then he said quietly, "You ever feel like you're holding your breath, just waiting for your life to start again?" I turned to look at him, and something in his face, the tiredness, the honesty, broke something open in me. I nodded. Every day. He didn't reach for me then. He just looked. That kind of silence is its own kind of touch. Patient, heavy, electric. When he dropped me off, he didn't ask to come in. He just said, "Take care of yourself." And for the first time in months, I wanted to. But that night, lying next to Ryan, the memory of Elijah's voice kept echoing in my head. I could feel the distance between me and my husband like a canyon. I tried to close it, reached out to touch his hand, but he shifted away, mumbling something about work. It was such a small thing, that movement, but it felt like a verdict. 2 weeks later, I went back to Elijah's shop under the pretense of getting the car checked again. I think we both knew what we were doing, but neither of us said it. He was quieter that day. His eyes lingered longer. The rain started again, as if the sky had been waiting for us to make our next mistake. When the power went out, We were caught in the dark. Only a single candle burned on his workbench, its flame trembling against the walls. I remember the sound, the soft patter of rain on the roof, the slow rhythm of his breathing, the way the silence seemed to press against my skin. He looked at me, and the world stopped pretending. I don't remember who moved first. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was him. But when his hand brushed my cheek, everything I'd been holding back came undone. The kiss wasn't wild or reckless. It was fragile, trembling, like we were both afraid of what it meant. It lasted only a moment. But in that moment, the air shifted, and something inside me broke in a way that couldn't be fixed. I stepped back, heart pounding, guilt rising like smoke in my chest. I shouldn't, I began, but the words died. He didn't chase me. He just said, I know. That night, I sat in my car for what felt like hours before starting the engine. The candlelight still flickered behind my eyelids, haunting me. When I finally drove home, the streetlights blurred through my tears. Ryan was asleep on the couch, laptop still open, phone in his hand. I stood there watching him, this man I'd promised forever to, and felt like I'd already betrayed him just by remembering how it felt to be seen. I told myself it would stop there, that it was a moment, a mistake, a weakness I'd bury and forget. But you can't unlight a fire once it's been sparked. You can only wait for the flames to spread, and by the time I realized they already had, it was far too late to save what they were burning through. For weeks, I lived between two lives, one painted in daylight and the other hidden in the quiet dark. By day, I was the wife who smiled through dinners she didn't taste, who listened to her husband talk about work as if every word were written on a wall I couldn't read. By night, I was something else entirely. A woman who came alive in the glow of a small garage light, whose laughter echoed against concrete walls and mixed with the sound of turning wrenches and low music. It wasn't constant. Sometimes I'd stay away for days, determined to stop, to breathe, to fix what I'd broken inside myself. But then I'd see his name flash on my phone, and all that resolve would crumble like paper in rain. Just checking if the car's still running, he'd text. I'd reply, barely. We both knew what it meant. Every time I walked into his shop, I told myself it would be the last. And every time I left, I felt more lost than before. The guilt was heavy, yes, but it came with a strange comfort, like the weight of something you choose to carry because the silence without it feels unbearable. I told myself it was love. It wasn't. It was escape. From loneliness, from invisibility, from the version of myself that had learned to settle for being half seen. Elijah never promised me anything, and maybe that's why it hurt less when he looked at me like I was something fragile and holy. It wasn't about forever. It was about being noticed now, but secrets rot, no matter how carefully you hide them. I started forgetting small things, leaving lipstick in the glove compartment, smelling faintly of motor oil, checking my phone too quickly. Ryan noticed. He didn't say anything at first, but his silence changed. It wasn't absent anymore. It was watching, waiting. One night, he came home early. I was in the shower, humming to myself, and when I came out, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, phone in hand, his face drained of all color. I knew before he said a word. I'd left my phone unlocked. There was a message. Just one line from Elijah. Can't stop thinking about you. He didn't shout. Didn't throw anything. That was almost worse. He just looked at me with this expression I'll never forget. Not rage, not sadness, just disbelief. Like he'd been holding a picture of me in his head for years and suddenly realized it wasn't real. Who is he? He asked. His voice was calm, too calm. I tried to speak, but the truth jammed in my throat. He stood up, set the phone down, and said, You could have just told me you were unhappy. The way he said it, quiet, broken. It cut deeper than any scream could have. I wanted to say I was sorry, but even that felt too small, too hollow. He walked out before I could find the words. The sound of the front door closing was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. I called Elijah that night, shaking. He picked up on the second ring. I told him what happened, my voice cracking. There was a long pause, and then he said, "You should stay with him." "Try to fix it." Something in me snapped. "You think that's possible now?" I whispered. He sighed, his tone heavy. "No, but you'll hate yourself if you don't try." It was the last honest thing he ever said to me. After that, everything blurred. Days bled into nights. Ryan stopped answering my texts. He stayed with friends, then his sister. I drove past his office just to see if his car was there. I wrote letters I never sent. At some point, I stopped going to the shop. I couldn't. Every sound there reminded me of him: the clatter of tools, the hiss of an air compressor, the faint hum of the radio. Even driving became unbearable. Every road felt like it led back to something I'd destroyed. The worst part wasn't losing Ryan. It wasn't even losing Elijah. It was realizing that in trying to be seen, I'd gone blind. I'd mistaken attention for affection, need for love, escape for freedom. The silence that followed was merciless. There were nights I'd wake up gasping, thinking I heard Ryan in the hallway. Mornings where I'd forget for a second that he was gone, until I turned to his side of the bed and saw nothing but the imprint he'd left behind. It's strange how betrayal doesn't end with exposure. It lingers, it echoes, it haunts you long after the dust has settled, and sometimes it's not the person you betrayed who can't forgive you. It's yourself. Forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's a long, quiet ache, a process that begins the day you stop trying to forget. For me, it started months after everything ended, when the house felt less like a home and more like a museum of all the things I'd ruined. Ryan had taken his clothes, his toothbrush, even his coffee mug. But he'd left the little things: a jacket on the hook, a few books on the shelf, the indentation on his side of the bed. Ghosts of ordinary life. I used to run my fingers over the spine of his favorite novel and wonder if guilt could ever be heavy enough to feel like penance. I didn't see Elijah again for a long time. Word got around that he'd closed the shop and moved 2 towns over. Maybe it was shame. Maybe it was mercy. I can't say I blamed him. Every time I passed that old building, I felt like the air itself was holding its breath. The sign still swung in the wind, creaking softly, the only proof that he'd ever been there at all. For a while, I filled my days with noise, work, chores, the gym, anything to drown out the quiet. But silence has a way of waiting for you. It sits there, patient and cruel, until you run out of distractions. And when it finally catches you, it forces you to listen, not to the world, but to yourself. The first time Ryan agreed to meet me, it was at a small cafe downtown. He looked thinner, older somehow, as if the months had taken more from him than time should allow. I wanted to reach for his hand, but I didn't. He didn't either. We talked about logistics first: paperwork, bills, the house, safe topics for people who used to love each other. Then, right before leaving, he said, "I'm not angry anymore." His voice was flat, but there was something behind it. Not peace exactly, but exhaustion. I just don't understand why. I could have told him 100 things. That I felt invisible, that I was lonely, that I was too weak to ask for what I needed. But none of it sounded like the truth. The truth was simpler and crueler than that. I wanted to feel alive, and I didn't care who got hurt in the process. So I just said, "I'm sorry." He nodded. "I know." And that was it. No tears, no second chances. Just a quiet acceptance that some things, once broken, don't get fixed. In the weeks that followed, I started writing. Not to him, not to Elijah, to myself. Letters I'd never send. Confessions I'd never read out loud. I wrote about the smell of oil on Elijah's hands, about the sound of rain against the garage roof, about the way my heart raced when I knew it shouldn't. But most of all, I wrote about silence, the kind that comes after a truth you can't take back. One evening, months later, I took a drive. Not toward anyone this time, just out into the open, where the road stretched endlessly and the world felt wide enough to hold my mistakes. I pulled over near an old gas station, the sky bleeding pink into gray, and sat there listening to the engine hum. That same sound that had once started it all. It hit me then. How everything that destroyed me had also forced me to see myself clearly for the first time. I wasn't the victim I'd once believed I was, nor the villain I feared becoming. I was something in between, flawed, desperate, human. I closed my eyes and whispered into the quiet, "I forgive you." I wasn't talking to Ryan, or to Elijah. I was talking to the version of me who had needed too much from others and given too little to herself. The tears came slowly, not from sadness, but release. I sat there until the sun slipped below the horizon, until the world turned blue and still. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like running from the silence. Now, when people ask about my past, I tell them I learned that love isn't what saves you. Truth does. And sometimes, the only way to find it is to break everything that isn't real. Elijah once told me that engines don't die all at once. They give you signs, little warnings if you care enough to listen. I think people are the same. We don't shatter out of nowhere. We rust quietly, from the inside, until one day something finally gives. I still drive that same old car. It rattles sometimes, the steering's off and the paint's fading in places. But every time I hear the engine start, I think of the man who repaired it, and the part of myself I've been trying to repair ever since. And maybe that's what forgiveness really is. Not forgetting what broke you, but learning how to live with the sound of it still running.